So today, itutuloy po natin yung ating series sa book ng Esther. Our passage for today is not the whole chapter 2 of Esther, but only chapter 2, verses 1 to 18. Sige po, join me as I read the passage. Esther 2. After these things, when the anger of King Ahasuerus had abated, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. Then the king's young men who attended him said, "Let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom to gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem in Susa the citadel under custody of Hegai, the king's eunuch who is in charge of the women. Let their cosmetics be given them, and let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti." This pleased the king, and he did so. Now there was a Jew in Susa the citadel, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjaminite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem among the captives, carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away. He was bringing up Hadassah, that is Esther, the daughter of his uncle, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman had a beautiful figure and was lovely to look at. And when her father and her mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So when the king's order and his edict were proclaimed, and when many young women were gathered in Susa the citadel in custody of Hegai, Esther also was taken into the king's palace and put in custody of Hegai, who had charge of the women. And the young woman pleased him and won his favor, and he quickly provided her with her cosmetics and her portion of food, and with 7 chosen young women from the king's palace, and advanced her and her young women to the best place in the harem. Esther had not made known her people or kindred, for Mordecai had commanded her not to make it known. And every day Mordecai walked in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and what was happening to her. Now when the turn came for each young woman to go into King Ahasuerus, after being 12 months under the regulations for the women, since this was the regular period of their beautifying, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with spices and ointments for women. When the young woman went into the king in this way, she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening, she would go in, and in the morning, she would return to the second harem in custody of Shaashgaz, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. She would not go into the king again unless the king delighted in her, and she was summoned by name. Verse 15. When the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his own daughter, to go into the king, she asked for nothing except what Hegai, the king's eunuch, who had charge of the women, advised. Now Esther was winning favor in the eyes of all who saw her. And when Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his royal palace, in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign, the king loved Esther more than all the women, and she won grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king gave a great feast for all his officials and servants. It was Esther's feast. He also granted a remission of taxes to the provinces and gave gifts with royal generosity. The grass withers, the flower fades. Okay. Okay. Good afternoon again. No? So yung last preaching natin sa the book of Esther, we talk about it's the Lord accomplishes His purpose, no, in everything. Tapos nakita natin doon na even yung man's pride, yung mga wrong decisions, and even the ordinary laws of the land, God is able to use all of this to accomplish His redemptive purpose. Diba? So, yung routine na nangyayari sa bansa, di ba? So, even right now in our country, nakikita natin na, sabi nga ni Pastor kanina sa pastoral prayer natin na it is easy for our hearts to be steered or to be discouraged with what we are hearing, no? But we thank the Lord because in all of this, God is still sovereign, and His providence still prevails. So, ngayon sa habang ito, we will continue our study on the book of Esther. Esther, the passage that we just read, Esther 2, verses 1 to 18. Okay. So, fueled by the massive reach of social media, streaming platforms like Netflix are now producing blockbuster series that completely rival or even exceed or sometimes even exceed the record set by movie studios in the past era. Mas maraming ang bilis matapatan yung mga blockbuster records ng mga movie studios before with the streaming platforms that we have. Okay. This afternoon, we resume our exposition of the book of Esther, a historical narrative that, if adapted for the screen today, would probably be controversial, if not outrightly offensive to some. So, the story of Esther, the book of Esther, is brimming with complex drama. No? Tapos maraming we find here in the story courageous protagonist, strategic supporting cast, and chilling or devious counter-protagonist or antagonist. Each scene of the story delivers tension, but as we look closer, we will see that the ultimate director of this script is working entirely behind the scenes. He is unhindered and He is sovereign. We give praise to our God because He has preserved this book, the book of Esther, within the sacred canon of scriptures, where every word is breathed out by God. Even though God's name, is never mentioned in its verses, no? The name of God is never mentioned in the book of Esther. But we thank Him because every word in the book of Esther is still breathed out by God. And so, we humbly bow to the authority of the word and trust the Lord that as we read the passage and study it this afternoon, and we try to visualize the scene or consider the drama behind the scenes, we will not respond as the world does. How does the world respond? Some consider it as foolishness, or some even think of it as myth or relic of the past that is best forgotten. But may we respond as people who have been redeemed, who are consciously grateful of our salvation, and who actively pursue to behold God in the ordinary course of things. That we actively pursue God in the ordinary course of things, knowing that God faithfully delivers His people from their enemies and always works for our good, that we might be to the praise of His glory. In our study this afternoon, we will divide the first 18 verses, the one that we have read, into 3 parts. And since this is a story, these 3 parts are also the 3 main scenes of this particular part of the story, where we will draw our points. So ang points natin, makikita din natin sa page 20 ng ating bulletin. No? So first, for our sermon outline, Ang first point natin is that God used the young men to counsel and please the king in the direction of having a new queen. Tapos ang second point natin, God bestowed and used the beauty of Esther that she might be shown favor and be prepared well for her presentation to the king. And then third point, God gave Esther extraordinary beauty to be chosen by the king over the other beautiful women. In these three parts of the story where we get the points, we will see clearly how God is at work, actively at work, not just as a spectator, as some belief systems would espouse. In question 18 of the Westminster Larger Catechism, we learned about God's providence. He's preserving and governing all His creatures, ordering them and all their actions to His own glory. But take note of the Westminster Divine's words to describe the providence. In the same question 18, they use these words to describe providence: most holy, wise, and powerful. No? Most holy, wise, and powerful. So this afternoon, our message, we entitled it as God Prepares His Deliverance Beforehand. To remind us that God is not reactive, and neither is He caught unaware of what is happening, by what is happening. Instead, our God, the sovereign God, actively acts, preserves, and governs everything. God orchestrates the deliverance of His people in advance. We will try to understand how God works out His providence even before a crisis or problem arises. Okay. Our sermon idea is this: God worked behind the ordinary course of things to prepare the people's deliverance beforehand. God worked behind the ordinary course of things to prepare the people's deliverance beforehand. As we continue with our story, from chapter 1, we learn that the setting is still the same. Saan yung setting? In Susa, the citadel. And the Jews, yung mga Hudyo, they are still exiles in a foreign land. No? This is in Persia, Media, no? Outside Israel, and they are here. So they're exiles, no? Sojourners, pilgrims. Okay. From the end in chapter 1, yung nag-stop tayo sa chapter 1 sa verse 22, we find here at the beginning of chapter 2, at the opening of chapter 2, King Ahasuerus, who is pictured as, he is portrayed in the beginning verse as one. Una, his anger had abated. The fury he felt, the anger he felt when Queen Vashti refused to come at his command sa chapter 1, ay nawala na yung fury na yon. It has already subsided. Sabi dito, the anger had abated. Yun ang una. Pangalawa, he remembered Vashti. He remembered Vashti, what Vashti had done, and what he had decreed against her. So we find that in verse 1. Okay. But notice the words, after these things. That is how the chapter 2 started, no? After these things. This points to the fact that as the largest empire that time, things are happening, no? Life happens, things are happening. Even while the king is busy, regular and daily routines continue to unfold for everyone. Meaning to say, life does not stop. Normal activities do not come to a halt. Ordinary routines continue to happen and progress for everyone. The usual procedure or activities, whether for the ordinary citizen or an exile or those in the royal palace, the ordinary course of things come to pass. No? Nangyayari yung ordinary course of things. And because his anger already abated, na nag-subside na yung galit na, matinding galit na kay Queen Vashti, so nandito na tayo sa verse 2. Meron na siyang time na kausapin, no? Makausap ng yung mga attendants niya ng maayos. Kasi siguro nasa ano na siya, okay na yung frame of mind niya. Kaya sa verse 2, kaya our first point is this: God used the young men to counsel and please the king in the direction of having a new queen. Okay. So we find that in starting from verse 2. So, ginamit ng Diyos yung mga attendants niya, young men, na mag-advise kay King Ahasuerus. Ang yung advice nila, naging natuwa ang king. Nang sa gayon, na mapapunta na doon sa direction na magkakaroon na ng bagong queen. Okay. In chapter 1, we learned there that there was a group of wise men, no? A group of wise men described as who knew the times. And these wise men advised him about what the law states in regard to the action of Queen Vashti. Now in chapter 2, meron ding mga young men naman ang sinabi dito. The king's young men sa verse 2. These young men proposed to the king an important matter. A matter that is a logical continuation of the one given by the wise men in chapter 1. No? So, this follows what the wise men advised the king to do. Since Vashti was removed from her position, ito yung advice ng wise men in chapter 1. Since Vashti was removed from her position and was no longer queen, it is only proper that a new queen be chosen. So these young men are the king's personal attendants. They are Ahasuerus' personal domestic court attendants. Essentially, they are his immediate staff, no? Who wait on him. Talagang pagsilbihan siya, lahat ng pangangailangan niya. So these young men, these are the same young men mentioned in chapter 6, verse 3. Kasi sa chapter 6, verse 3, when the king was not able to sleep, no, he asked these young men, what honor was bestowed on Mordecai for warning the king about the plot of the two eunuchs? So, these are the same young men. So, ang question ngayon is, what is the proposal or advice of these young men? Diba, nag-advise sila. Their proposal is for King Ahasuerus to find a beautiful new queen. Okay. So sabi na, let a search be made. Magkaroon ng search. Let a search be made throughout the whole kingdom. So mababasa natin yan sa 3. No? Let a search be made throughout the whole kingdom. Search for beautiful young virgins who will be a potential queen, who will take the place of Vashti. Let this be a kingdom-wide search, covering all 127 branches. Sabi niya sa verse 3, all the provinces of his kingdom. So nalaman natin sa chapter 1 na may 127 provinces ito. Yung kingdom niya is very, very big in area, geographical area. No? How is this going to be done? So yung advice nila, very specific din, no? Paano to gagawin? No? Yung paano maghanap ng beautiful young queen. So ang sabi nila, let the king appoint officers in all provinces. So sa 127 provinces, merong i-appoint ang king, no? Officers. And these appointed officers will gather and bring all the beautiful young virgins or young women to the harem in Susa. Susa is the capital city where the royal palace is, di ba? Where the king has his royal throne. So, dadalhin nila, kukunin nila sa area of yung province nila kung saan sila namumuno, dadalhin nila, and then, bibiyahe papunta sa Susa. These selected young virgins will then be placed under the custody of Hegai. Hegai, nasa verse 3. Custody of Hegai, because Hegai oversees the operations of the harem. siya ang nagpapatakbo sa buong harem, no? Or the women's quarters in the New King James Version uses the word women's quarters, no? Hegai is a eunuch, a king's eunuch, and he is in charge of the harem. Okay. The women in the harem will be supplied with cosmetics. Ibigyan sila ng cosmetics, mga pampaganda, beauty treatments to prepare them well to meet the king when the time comes. Okay. Each one will meet the king. And the woman who pleases the king will be made queen instead of Vashti. So, this was the counsel made by the young men. May overall counsel sila, tapos how to go about with the counsel, meron din silang pinrovide na mechanics or yung how to do, di ba? How to implement. Tapos the counsel, this was the counsel given by the young men. And we will find later that this counsel that they gave will set up Esther to be positioned for royalty, di ba? So this is the ordinary course of things in the palace. Diba? Mag-advise sila sa hari at paano gagawin. Ngunit, as we have in our sermon idea, God works behind the ordinary course of things. No? This is the normal course of things in the palace, but behind this, the accounts of the king will set the stage for Esther to become queen. Here we find God actively working, though He is never mentioned in the passage. He is never mentioned in the passage. He used the young men to counsel the king. And the last part of verse 4 states, yung verse 4, sabi dito, this pleased the king. This pleased the king, and he did so. Kaya, since natuwa siya, sinunod niya yung counsel ng young men. He ordered that the advice be implemented, thus setting the direction of having a new queen. That the young men counseled the king is not extraordinary. It is the ordinary course of things, having his young men counsel him from time to time. It is how things work in the royalty, in the royal palace. A king has personal attendants who know his basic and personal needs and who give advice whenever the king has personal issues. That is a normal course of things in the royal palace. And God used this ordinary course of things, the usual process of going about the daily activities, to set in motion His deliverance of His people. The young men, when they gave their advice, they were just doing what they usually do. Gave advice to the king. However, behind this usual routine activity, the sovereign God is preparing to deliver His people. Indeed, God's providence is His most wise and powerful governing of all His creatures and all their actions. Church, what a wonderful assurance this is. No? The people we meet daily or those who we do transactions with daily, yung mga nakakausap natin or nakaka-interact natin regularly, we can be assured that our good and loving Father governs everything. Though at times, our ordinary course is difficult or painful, or sometimes even boring or dreadful, God is ordering everything to His own glory. As God used the young men to counsel and please the king, sabi sa verse 4, displeased the king in the direction, God used the counsel in the direction of having a new queen, He also gave a specific providential design to Esther. So ito po yung ating point number 2. No? In our second point, God bestowed and used the beauty of Esther that she might be shown favor and be prepared well for her presentation to the king. Okay. We find this in verses 5 to 11. The young men's counsel was specific, no? Very specific, and meron ding mga instruction or how to implement it. What was the counsel? To search for young, beautiful virgins. Verse 7 tells us, no? Verse 7, tells us that the young woman had a beautiful figure and was lovely to look at. Referring to Esther, no? The young woman had a beautiful figure and was lovely to look at. God bestowed this beauty to Esther. No? Ito ay bigay ng Diyos kay Esther. Okay. Clearly, not a work of man, but totally a work of God. Verse 3 tells us that sa verse 3, nalaman natin kanina na yung mga napili sa search na mga ginather sa Susa, they are given cosmetics, beauty treatments to enhance their natural beauty. Okay. So this pertains to man-made products what man-made products can do to emphasize the form or accentuate shapes, no? Shapes. However, when verse 7 talks about the beauty of Esther, we are made to understand that it is the Lord who gave it. Were there other beautiful young virgins? For sure, there were many. Imagine the size of the kingdom, no? 127 provinces. Huge kingdom as described in chapter 1. So the immense geographical extent of the kingdom would also mean that ang daming population din, di ba? Ang daming tao na nasa sakupan niya. Which in return, a logical conclusion would tell us that there were many beautiful young women as well, young virgins as well. But more than just a logical inference, we read in verse 8. We read in verse 8. When many young women were gathered in Susa, the citadel. No? So meaning to say, the text informs us specifically na talagang marami nga ang beautiful young women. No? There were many beautiful young women who were gathered in Susa, the citadel, in custody of Hegai. Okay. There were indeed many young women who passed the initial screening, no, so to say, yung may search, so pasado sila. Kaya dinala sila doon sa Susa, the citadel. In short, the search was hugely successful, gathering many young, beautiful aspirants to the royal position. Okay. However, another layer appears in verse 9. No? Sabi sa verse 9, aside sa verse 7, sabi dito sa verse 7 na the young woman had a beautiful figure and was lovely to look at. We have already established that this is the work of God, given by God to Esther. However, in verse 9, may dinagdag pa. Sabi sa verse 9, and the young woman pleased him and won his favor. Okay. Hegai, the king's eunuch, yung custodian of the harem, was pleased with Esther. She also won his favor. No? That is why she obtained the favor of Hegai, na yung si Hegai is powerful man kasi siya ang in charge sa buong women's quarters o sa buong harem. At nakuha niya, kung sa ating ngayon, nakuha niya ang loob ni Hegai. Diba? So, magaan ang loob ng tao sa iyo. Have you ever experienced this na yung taong kausap mo is magaan ang loob sa iyo? Our experience tells us that whenever this happens, nung magaan ang loob ng tao sa atin, things become easier or circumstances may turn in our favor. Yung experience natin. That Esther pleased Hegai and won his favor, no, na he pleased Hegai, is this because of Esther herself? What separated her from the rest of the young women? Kasi di ba marami sila. So anong pinagkaiba ni Esther? What made her stand out, particularly sa perspective ni Hegai? Simple, no? Favor or grace. favor, and grace. Our second point emphasizes this. God bestowed beauty to Esther and then used this beauty so that Esther will find favor in the eyes of the people. So still, the work of God, no? Granting grace, granting favor, using the people to be kind to Esther. God was using what He has given to Esther to affect Haggai such that Haggai will show her favor, will show Esther unusual kindness. And this favor from Haggai will result to specific actions that will prepare Esther well for her presentation to the king. So since natuwa si Haggai, Esther pleased Haggai and won his favor, may mga ginawa si Haggai specific actions as a result of being pleased with Esther. But let's backtrack a little, no? Sabi dito, parang ang scene na nakikita natin is that the counsel of the young men became a king's order, an edict. Sabi sa verse 8, no? Sabi sa verse 8, so when the king's order and his edict were proclaimed, no? From the council, it became an edict that was proclaimed. After the order to search for beautiful young virgins was proclaimed, the officers in all the provinces were able to gather many women. No? Marami silang nag-gather na many women. And these women were brought to Susa, to the harem that is managed by Haggai. Okay. And included in the young women was Esther. Okay. Since she is living in the kingdom of King Ahasuerus, she is also included in the search. Kasama din siya sa pipiliin. Kasama siya sa mga pinili na dalhin sa harem to be among the many women from whom a new queen will be chosen. Okay? So balikan natin doon sa part na Esther pleased Haggai. So ano yung mga concrete actions na ginawa ni Haggai? Mababasa natin to siya sa starting from verse 9. Anong mga ginawa ni Haggai? Una, he quickly provided her with cosmetics. And then, he provided her portion of food. Or sa ibang version, special food, special menu, exclusively for Esther. And then, Haggai also assigned to Esther 7 young women to serve as her attendants. These attendants are from the king's palace. No? So maraming mga attendants doon, helpers, and they were chosen by Haggai to serve Esther. They will, pagsilbihan nila si Esther, para si Esther will be prepared well so that when the time comes that she will be presented to the king, maayos si Esther. And then last, he moved Esther, or he advanced Esther and her and her 7 young attendants to the best place in the harem. So, tingnan niyo yung dahil natuwa siya kay Esther, Esther won the favor of Haggai. Hindi nag-stop doon, may mga ginawang concrete action si Haggai, because of being yung natuwa na he to show his favor to Esther. In short, from among the many young women, Esther got special treatment, preferential attention and care given by Haggai that will help Esther prepare well. This will help Esther to prepare well. All because she pleased him and won his favor. Clearly, a providential act of God toward his redemptive purpose. In short, toward his redemptive purpose. So as the stage is set, the stage is set for Esther to be chosen as queen in our next point. Let us also remember, as the set stage for Esther to be chosen as the next queen in our next point, let us also remember the person in the background. Sino to? Si Mordecai. We see in our text that 3 verses, 3 verses ang ginamit to introduce Mordecai. Sa verse 5, starting from verse 5, now there was a Jew in Susa the citadel, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjaminite. 6, who had been carried away from Jerusalem among the captives, carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Judah, had carried away. So, 3 beses inulit yung carried away, no? In-emphasize talaga na they were exiled. No? Exiled from Israel to ano. Tapos 7, ito si Mordecai, he was bringing up Hadassah, that is Esther, the daughter of his uncle, for she had neither father nor mother. Okay. So here in these 3 verses, to introduce Mordecai, a genealogy was given to help us know who this man is, no? Kung sino to si Mordecai. He is a Jew living in Susa, and he was the son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, who was from the tribe of Benjamin. So, na-trace talaga si Mordecai yung lineage na up to Benjamin. So, sino ba si Benjamin? Benjamin, one of the patriarchs, son of Jacob. No? Jacob, who was given a new name by God to be Israel. So, from being an exile in Persia, ito si Mordecai. Mordecai has a lineage that traces back to Jacob. No? Even when no mention is made of God, we see clearly the steadfast love of God for His people. No? We see His steadfast love for His people. In 1 Chronicles 16, verse 13, we read, all offspring of Israel, His servant, children of Jacob, His chosen one. And then in verse 15, 1 Chronicles chapter 16, verse 15, remember His covenant forever, the word that He commanded for 1,000 generations. And then in verse 34, same chapter in 1 Chronicles, oh, give thanks to the Lord, for He is good, for His steadfast love endures forever. By presenting the lineage of Mordecai, we are made to see that even if no one mentions God, He is there. And He is always for the good of His people, even if we cannot see Him. As Esther thrived and flourished under the watchful custodianship of Hegai, no? Kasi special siya, no? Binigyan siya ng lahat, di ba? So, he thrived, she thrived, she flourished inside the harem. Mordecai, her cousin, who brought her up as his own daughter, si Mordecai, habang si Esther nasa harem at bumubuti yung ano niya doon because of sa pangangalaga ni Hegai, Mordecai, her cousin, diligently walked every day near the courtyard of the harem to check on Esther and how she was doing. Nasa verse 11 yan, no? And every day, Mordecai walked in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and what was happening to her. As Esther received special favor from Hegai, we see in our third point the climax of the scene. No? Esther is chosen as queen. Our third point is this: God gave Esther extraordinary beauty to be chosen by the king over the other beautiful women. We find that starting from verse 12 hanggang verse 18. No? So imagine the scene. No? Picture with me the scene. For 12 months, starting sa verse 12, no? For 12 months, the young women had to undergo beauty treatments, no? Beauty regimens. 6 months, very specific, 6 months using oil of myrrh, followed by another 6 months using spices or perfumes and ointments. A total of 1 year to prepare the young women. No? Sabi sa verse 12, since this was a regular period of their beautifying. No? Yung 1 year na yon. Then when the schedule arrives for the women to go to the king, she is given whatever she desired to take from the harem to the king's palace. So From the harem, pupunta na siya doon sa king's palace. And kung time niya na yon, she can take whatever she wants, no? Kasi 'di ba may room sila doon sa harem. So kung anong gusto niya dalhin, anything she wanted to bring, whether clothing or jewelry, she can do that. But there is a protocol, no? May protocol diyan. Sabi dito, the young woman will go inside the king's palace in the evening. So strict ang protocol nila. Papasok in the evening, and in the morning, she would return not to the harem under Hegai, but she will return to the second harem under the custody of Shaashgaz, who is also another king's eunuch, no? One of the king's eunuch. But this one, he is now in charge of the concubines or of the wives. So, meaning to say, after they come to the king, the young virgin, the young woman, in the morning, hindi na siya babalik doon sa original harem niya. Pupunta na siya doon sa kabilang harem, no? Under na siya kay Shaashgaz. And then, may second protocol pa na the young woman would not go into the king again, or she would not return to him unless he was pleased with her, or the king delighted in her. So kung nangyari yan, very specific then, the king summoned her by name. No? Because the king delighted in her, he knew her name. And then he would call her by her name, not a generic name, but her own personal name. So tatawagin talaga siya because the king delighted in her. So that is the protocol, no? A strict protocol that requires everybody to follow. Dapat sundin ng lahat. Okay. Now we come to verse 15. No? When the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his own daughter, to go into the king, si Esther's turn na to go into the king, she asked for nothing. No? Kasi diba sabi kanila, yung mga young women, they can ask for anything na dadalhin nila, clothing or jewelry. Pero si Esther, anong ginawa niya? She did not ask for anything. Ang ginawa lang niya, except what Hegai, the king's eunuch, advised her. So meaning to say, sinunod lang niya yung anong advice ni Hegai. Hindi siya nag-decide for herself kung anong dadalhin niya. Okay. So she trusted Hegai, no, na yung sasabihin ni Hegai is, kasi she won the favor of Hegai. Esther knew that yung ano man yung i-advise ni Hegai is sa ikabubuti niya yon. Even if she was allowed to ask for anything from the harem, Esther obediently followed what Hegai advised her to bring. So sa verse 15 pa rin, sabi dito, now Esther was winning favor in the eyes of all who saw her. Kasi lumabas na siya sa harem, di ba? So papunta na siya sa king's palace. So many people saw her. But stay in this phrase for a minute. Sabi dito, now Esther was winning favor in the eyes of all who saw her. In the last part of verse 15. Okay. When she was still in the harem, she won the favor of Hegai. But as she leaves the harem to go to the king, she was winning favor from everyone who saw her. Okay. But wait, because we are yet to see the climax. We see that in verses 16 and 17, no? Yung plateau, yung climax ng ating story. Sa verse 16, we read, and when Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his royal palace, in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign, 17, the king loved Esther more than all the women, and she won grace and favor in his sight. more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Okay. So, dalawang beses inulit na more than all the virgins, tapos more than all the women. No? The king loved Esther more than all the women, and she won praise and favor more than any of the other women. So because the king delighted in Esther, his delight in Esther made the king set the royal crown on her head. No? Binigay niya ang crown kay Esther, signifying that he is now choosing Esther to be queen instead of Vashti. So here we find, no, that the stage is now firmly set. No? Esther is now officially the queen. She has now access to the king. Thus, the preparation of the deliverance of God's people is progressing and going as planned. No? Did the king or Esther or Mordecai know what will soon happen? No. Nobody even knows the impending threat to all the Jews. And nobody could ever have known the deliverance God has decreed all along. In the absence of knowledge of all these future events, for now, it is proper for everyone to have a celebration. Kasi masayang okasyon yon, di ba? It is a joyous occasion. Kaya in verse 18, yung last verse natin, sabi dito, then the king gave a great feast for all his officials and servants. It was Esther's feast. He also granted a remission of taxes to the provinces and gave gifts with royal generosity. Okay. So for the young men, doon sa verse 2, for the young men who advised the king, this requires a joyful celebration because yung counsel nila is now a reality. Meron nang napiling bagong queen. Okay. And for Haggai, who gave special attention to Esther to prepare her well, his efforts have paid off kasi si Esther ang napili. For Esther, well, she now wears a crown. From being part of a remnant, a foreigner in the land of their conquerors, she is now the queen. So what a reversal of fortune. No? From being an exile, one of the exiles, she is now the queen. And for King Ahasuerus, so we can say that he can say that life is good for him. No? He has a new queen, his empire is vast, and his subjects are staying within their limits. No? We can say that the institutions within his kingdom are working kasi naging successful ngayong plano, naging maayos from 127 provinces, nakapili sila. So, the institutions are working. Okay? The process is working just fine in his kingdom. And his governance over the 127 provinces is somewhat secure. That is why he held a great banquet to honor Esther, inviting all his officials and servants. And it was Esther's feast. Because she is the reason for the celebration. In keeping with the celebration, yung masayang okasyon yon, may mga ginawa ang king. Sabi sa verse 18, the king granted a remission of taxes to the provinces. So remission of taxes may be meron silang discount sa taxes or a tax holiday or merong tax break, no? Sa payment ng taxes, may tax break muna, remission of taxes. So, di ba sa atin naman, nababasa din natin sa elsewhere na remission of sins, forgiveness of sins, di ba? So, in this passage, so some of the debts, some of the taxes were forgiven by the king. Kasi masaya siya, di ba? Okay. So, aside from remission of taxes, granting remission of taxes, he also gave generous gifts to everyone. Na dinescribe sa verse 18 as a royal generosity, no? That is how the gifts are described. So royal generosity. So pwedeng sabihin natin na yung a person is generous, middle class is generous, but when we say royal generosity from the king or from the, so lavish talaga yon, di ba? Kasi royal generosity. Haggai prepared Esther for the king. No. The king chose Esther to be queen. In all this, we see with clarity the hidden hand of God graciously granting favor to Esther through Haggai and King Ahasuerus. God designed Esther with extraordinary beauty so that she will be chosen by the king over the other beautiful women from the whole kingdom. No? Yung mga beautiful women that were gathered, no, by the officers, Esther was chosen. Long before a crisis or threat ever loomed or appeared on the horizon, the hand of God was faithfully working, quietly preparing his people's deliverance. We see his wise and powerful providence in every detail. No? The wise men in chapter 1 advising that Vashti be stripped of her royal position and never again to come before the king. The king's personal attendants, the young men counseling the king to search for a new queen, and even Esther's natural beauty winning over Haggai, and ultimately her selection by the king. God was actively positioning his instrument of rescue before the need for rescue even existed. So here we find that the cross is there not because God has already alternative in place to address human rebellion. The cross is a reality because it is God's eternal decree. Our salvation was never a divine afterthought. No? Rather, in his mercy and grace, God has planned the redemption of his people before the foundation of the world. Within the eternal counsel of peace, the triune God agreed upon our salvation and sealing our redemption in eternity past. We see the pattern of this preemptive grace across the seasons of history. No? Consider this church. The Jews in chapter 3 did not yet know of Haman's evil plot to utterly destroy them, but God had already prepared their deliverance. Long before Haman's malice was conceived or even Esther was even born. God's hand moves in secret. Just as Esther's true identity remained hidden in the palace because she had not yet disclosed her heritage or kindred, kasi yun ang instruction ni Mordecai, hindi niya dinisclose, so too, God's plan of rescue quietly unfolded behind the scenes. Before the crisis ever happened, before the fall ever became a tragic reality, God's instrument of deliverance was already on the throne. Kaya in verse 10, sabi sa verse 10, Esther had not made known her people or kindred, for Mordecai had commanded her not to make it known. So church, if our eternal salvation is secure in the hands of the triune God, why do we easily falter? No? Kung secure naman talaga yung ating salvation. Why do we allow sin? Yung sin that so easily entangles and weighs us down. Why do we allow this sin to blur our vision of the one who opened our eyes from spiritual blindness? Too often we question the steadfast love of the Lord whenever the things of this world overwhelm us. And we conveniently or stubbornly insist on our own ways instead of trusting his good, pleasing, and perfect design. As we navigate through life, we will not always understand why things happen. We cannot wait for circumstances to make sense or for things to come full circle before we obey. Let us instead be ready right now. No? We should be ready right now to live as the gospel calls us, walking the narrow path that God has prepared in advance for us to take. anchored on the finished work of the cross and looking to Jesus. No? We look to Jesus, who assures us of His providence. So we can rest in the truth that God has fully accomplished our redemption through the precious blood of His Son. Yes, through the precious blood of Christ. Through the story of Esther, as we close, through the story of Esther, we come to understand that while man, we act on its own impulses, it is God alone who knows and directs the ultimate reason and purpose of all things. Because of this, we should continually align ourselves with His divine will by humbly submitting to His word and obeying the Holy Spirit. Scripture demonstrates this with yung undeniable clarity. From the fall to the flood, from the Exodus to captivity, through Israel's tragic drift from worship to idolatry, from the raising and toppling of kings, it culminates beautifully and wondrously in the sending of His Son. Let us therefore, church, live with firm confidence. We should live with firm confidence and ever deepening hope and growing trust that God works all things for the good of those who love Him and are called according to His purpose.